Oh, that's good.
Like that?
Actually, that's pretty good.
That's nice. Does it make me look thinner? Is this my good side?
Yeah, it makes you look thinner.
Anything that makes me look thinner, I'm
Well,
going.
the father,
Of a 300
father
pound
found
baby,
the
please report to check stand 7.
7 or 14. I can't remember what it was, but
Yeah.
I just was reading that.
More?
Have we ever told that story on Instagram?
No, we haven't actually.
Okay, well let's start to record.
All right. So, well, the father of a 300-pound baby story. See, what had happened was, no, so we were doing our retreat, which I love those retreats. I love them for many reasons, but one of my
Yeah,
favorite
I
moments
hope
is
we get to do them again.
I think we will.
Yeah,
What do you think maybe 8 months, 9 months we'll be back to normal?
yeah.
I mean, the vaccine is
Maybe the fall. I just got invited to speak at a graduation in May,
okay.
virtual.
Oh, virtual?
Yeah,
All
so I thought,
right.
oh really?
How do you feel about the vaccine? So do you feel more like now that you got it, do you feel like you can put yourself out there a little more or no, you
Well,
still
I think so. I think it's like 10 days or 14 days
okay. But
after you get it that you're kind of more fully. I mean, vaccines just mean you're not going to go to the hospital and you're not going to go to the morgue.
okay.
So that seems like a good deal to me.
So what does it do exactly then?
I don't know what it exactly does, but that's, it's like unlike any vaccine we've ever had. I mean, it's like ridiculously effective.
Okay. So they
So,
put a lot of work into it.
yeah, I mean, I think the New York Times this morning was saying, yeah, when they write the books on this, they'll look back on this as kind of a remarkable medical
Phenomenon.
discovery and innovation.
Okay.
So we'll
Oh,
see.
all right. A ver qué pasa.
Yeah.
No, but going back to the retreats, you know what I loved about the retreats is I started to learn about a little bit about politics because of Morning Joe. Remember we would go and we would have our Starbucks
Yeah.
and then we would have our little McMuffin or a little
Yeah.
sausage McMuffin. Oh baby, that was the best part of the retreat.
And how did you hear about Morning Joe?
So
Would I have
Morning
it on the
Joe,
radio?
we would listen to it in the car every morning
Oh yeah.
on our drive to go get our coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like a 5 a.m. drive.
Yeah.
And we would drive, we would listen to it, we would go get our coffee. I
You
would
would
ask questions.
comment on politics.
Yeah. So where did Morning Joe come from? Like who is that? Who is Morning Joe?
Oh, he's a congressman, former congressman.
Okay.
So
And
I
he,
watch him. I like the cast of characters.
yeah, and he just talks politics. And it was very insightful for
And
me.
it's on at 3 in the morning. So I get up at 3. So I watch it from the beginning and like that.
And by the time I would get up, it would be already, I guess, nearing its end then, huh?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Because we would roll out around 5, I
Six
think.
6 a.m. it would be over.
Yeah, we would jam around 5, have our coffee, and then head back to the spot. But
Yeah.
so the story of the 300-pound baby is that's just when were we in, was it Target?
Well, no. Well, let's go back. So first of
Okay.
all, you and I are flying. It's just the two of us,
Yeah,
and we're at LAX,
yeah,
and we're kind of go. Let's go get you know bottle of water or magazine or something. And I said, hey, if you get lost, just
mhm.
remember that we're leaving out of gate 17. And then you said,
I said, yes, Papa.
no,
No,
said, and then you just pretended
yeah.
you were on the public. Would the
The
father
father of
of
a
a,
300-pound baby, please report to gate 17.
yeah. And so we laughed, and I thought to myself, where the hell did that
Yeah,
come from? So then we went to the retreat house, but the next morning we spoke to like a bunch of social workers
yeah,
at a
yeah.
hotel. And so then we get there early, and I looked on the thing and saw where we were, and I go, hey, I'm going to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
But if we get separated, we're in ballroom B.
Yeah.
And you said,
Will the father of a 300-pound baby please report to ballroom B?
It was like a 300-pound baby boy
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
So
But it
then,
was, I remember it was in the event of.
in the event of, yeah, and so then you said, um, we finished our talks, and it turned out you had forgotten to bring with you on this trip every imaginable hygiene item, like
Not
toothpaste.
everything. A few things.
It's like most things. And
I
so
misplaced a couple things
I
like
went, oh my
toothpaste.
God. So we went to like a Walmart and we each got a basket. And then I went to go get my stuff. And then I was done. And then I was walking the whole length of the store looking down the aisles. And I go, where the hell is he? And all of a sudden I heard,
Will the father of a 300-pound baby boy please report to check stand 7?
except it wasn't your
It
voice.
wasn't my voice.
It was a kind of a cracking adolescent, well, the father of a three, like a guy who was being held hostage.
Yeah.
And so I go to check stand 7, and there you are. You're on the floor howling. You had forced this unsuspecting teenage clerk
Yeah.
to read the script you had written
Yeah.
that said, "Will the father?" I don't know what you told him, but
So we had in the
yeah,
event that we got separated, well, we got separated. And I remember looking for my stuff, and I started looking around the store like, where's G? And I don't see you. And then the light bulb went on. I said it started at the airport, it carried on to
the
the hotel
hotel,
at the hotel. And I said, oh, this is where I'm just gonna tie it
right?
in a bow. And
All I remember was we told this story at a senior staff meeting.
and nobody laughed.
Crickets.
Cricket
Nobody laughed. And I thought, how did that happen? How did nobody laugh at that story? And I'm sure all our viewers at home right now
are gonna laugh.
aren't laughing either. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
Wow.
We thought it
Fingers
was
crossed. We thought it was funny.
the funniest,
I thought it was hilarious.
the funniest damn thing. And this poor kid you would set him up to.
Yeah. And it was
And
funny
then
because I
ever
told him
since
so
that
when
moment, we would always go, "Well, the father," and you always said it the same way.
Yeah.
The father.
The 300-pound baby boy. So it was funny because I told him, I said, hey, I lost my dad. I don't know where he's at, right? And he's like, oh, okay, are you serious? And I said, yeah, he's he's a little older gentleman. I said, do you think you can radio him on the store speaker? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I said, but wait. And I wrote it real quick. And I said, but can you say this, please? Because he'll only respond to this. And he looks at the note and he says, all right, I guess. And I remember it was just
Oh
classic. I
God.
loved it. I loved it. But
Oh my
around that
God.
time, just to kind of connect that story to, the father, and even me when I said it to the man, when I said it to the clerk about like I lost my dad, what I mean, I'm trying to find my father. It made me think about the book, the book Tattoos on the Heart, the first book. When there was a part in that book about the homie, I remember reading that book and just feeling I connected so much to the homie, and I forget his name now, but he had just got out, he had just paroled, and you took him to go buy some clothes from J.C. Penney or Sears or something. And you were in the store with him in line, and everybody was, kind of scared of him. Big Vato, similar to me, big guy, tattoos all over, and people were kind of, awestruck by this guy's size and stature. And I remember later that night you wrote that he called you in the middle of the night, and he asked you, well, he wakes you out of your sleep, and he says, you're my father, right? You've always been a father to me. And he says, you tell him, yeah, sure, son, like, yeah. And then he says, well, you'll be my father and I will be your son. you
He
know
said, "You've been my father all this time." I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Have I been your son?"
mm,
And I always said when I hung up and he was sobbing that he didn't discover he had a father that night. He discovered he was a son worth having.
yeah, that's the part that touched me because I think like our first role, well, my first role was that to be a son. That was my first role. I was born, I was a baby, and I was supposed to be a son. And I think because that role, for whatever reason, the circumstances at that time, I had to skip past that first role of being somebody's son. Like I didn't know who my dad was. My mom actually, I didn't know my mom was my mom until I was like about 9 or 10 years old. I thought it was my grandma. And then finding that out, I was like, damn, I looked up to my mom as an older sister. So when I found out she was my mom, then of course, I was happy. But then understanding her circumstances, and her addiction to drugs and her being a gang member and everything that came along with it, I wanted to be a son so bad, and my mom, so we have different dads, my brothers and sisters and I. And I just remember like every man that she ended up with, for whatever reason, they just didn't vibe with me. And so my sister Kathy's dad, um, he was just like he was a gang member too, but for whatever reason, he didn't want me to be in his car. And my mom, she was a good woman, but she was in love and she really wanted to be with this man. And I remember vividly a moment where I was standing in my grandmother's driveway and I wanted to go with her. And he looks at her and he says, "I don't want that kid in my car because he's gonna get my car dirty, so he has to stay here." And I stood there looking at my mom, and she looked over at me like sad to leave me, but she left with this guy anyway. And I just remember being hurt in my grandmother's driveway. And then it was just a buildup of events like that. And then it was the second man that I ended up remembering at a young age. And, out of nowhere, I don't even know why, he would just kick me. Like I'd be walking by him and he would just kick me. But now that I understand a little bit about trauma and people that are hurt, hurt people hurt people. So God only knows what type of life he went through, what type of pain he was carrying to kick a 9-year-old kid, 10-year-old kid, you know what I mean, just for walking by him. And those were the things I grew up with, my experiences. So I couldn't really be a son, like the son that I wanted to be, like to be up under my mother, to, have the dad. And I've talked about this before, the sitcoms of the dad and the mom and those dynamics. So when I read that part in the book, it really touched me. I resonated with it because it was like, yeah, that makes sense. How can I be anything else if I never completed my first role? If I never was able to inhabit my first role as a child, was to be a son. Like, how can I be anything else? How can I be a husband, a dad, a brother, a friend, if I never got to be a son first? And so what I found here, and man, I love you so much, and I mean this, I was able to actually be a son. And in turn, I was able to be everything else because I got to have that first role again. I got to be that. I got to be a son. I got to know that I was a son worth having. That it wasn't that I was unworthy of being a son, that it was the circumstances that people were living through that didn't allow them to live out their role. Like my mom's circumstances and everything she had been through, she wasn't able to be a mother. And if I look back, and I'm pretty sure I could discover that she probably wasn't able to live out her first role and to be a daughter fully because
Yeah,
of all the trauma.
I've never heard it as first role. I think that's good. And it's what enabled you to be a brother, a father, and a husband,
Yeah.
and a friend, even.
And a friend. Yeah.
Yeah.
And everything else that comes, like everything else that comes, a director and all these other things. I was able to be a son. And that's why I resonated so much with that story. Like that's why I feel like not only that homie, but myself and every other homie that comes through these doors, they inhabit that. And when they inhabit that, it liberates them. I that was what I was supposed to be. It was okay for me to be a son, but we grew up so fast and so rugged that I was like, okay, at a certain point in time in my life, in a very young age, I said, I can't feel this. Like, I can't no longer yearn for my mother's love because she's not coming back. And I got to go off and do X, Y, and Z. And then you get jumped into a gang, and then you limit yourself of having those type of emotions because they don't suit you in that life. They're harmful for your survival. And then you go to juvenile hall, and it's like you don't even have a space to tell somebody like, I miss my mom. Like I wish I could see my mom.
Yeah.
And then I went on to get to a point in my life where I convinced myself that I didn't need a mom. Like that's the crazy part about it is I begin to convince myself like I don't need a mom and I don't need a dad and I never needed them. But truth be told, I did need that. I did need a mom and I did need a dad. And there were supposed to be certain things that a child experiences, you know. I should have been cradled and nurtured and
Right.
those things were that wasn't a those should have been a given, you know. And so because of the circumstances, I had to suppress all that of those basic needs and then grow up in an environment where I couldn't even articulate. There was no space to say things like that. Like, you know what? I wish I had a dad. You know, I remember like being here, what it was like to even get to that point to say, damn, it's okay to have wanted a dad. Like, that's okay. Cause I had fed myself this narrative of like, I don't need a dad and I don't need a mom and I don't need love. I don't need anybody to love me, you know? And then really get into the truth of my life and say, like, man, I did want a dad. And when I talk about the sitcom, when I talk about Family Matters, that's my truth. I remember being a little boy sitting in front of the TV and I wanted Carl Winslow to be my dad, straight up. You know what I mean? And that's my truth. And I had suppressed it for so long, I was convinced that I didn't want or needed that. And I found liberation in speaking my truth and acknowledging my truth. And I think that's what happened with that homie too in your book. I love you so much.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I don't think I'd ever heard the part about not knowing that your mom was your mom.
Yeah.
You know, and some, you know, there you have homies who, you know, were born in Mexico, and they, you know, and the parents kind of say, we're going to the United States, and we'll come back, and then they leave this boy with the grandparents, and then they come back. I have a homie in mind who, you know, they had 3 more kids on this side. Then they go back to get him to bring him back, and they think, "Who are you?
Yeah.
You know, this my grandmother is my mom, and you're taking me away."
Yeah.
And later on, he ended up getting killed, a gang member. But before he ran away from home finally, and his parents were really good people, but he just kept saying, "Why did you take so long?
Yeah.
Come back and take me with you." I mean, it was 3 kids later, and then snatched him away from who he thought was his mom, his grandmother, who was his grandmother. But and then that's a trauma that's and a resentment that was hard for him to, and he never really could. He tried to, and we got close, and then he was killed, gunned down.
Damn.
But these things, you know, are so essential. You know, it's like, you know, you can't be snatched, and you can't be. You know, I know a homie who was doing fine and found out that just I don't know, he was a teenager, and the man he thought was his father, he ends up finding out, no, this is actually not your father. This is your stepfather. But by then he was like 16, and I don't know why. I mean, well, I guess I do, but he just went in the spiral, got into a neighborhood, drank every day, and it was because of that thing that he thought this man was his father, and he wasn't. But you know,
And I
they're all.
wonder if the intention was, I mean, what was the intention with telling them? Would you have said,
You know, he loved this man, which
okay,
was the odd thing. It was like a father, and you know, he raised him. But at some point, I don't know why it became known. He said, "Actually, this isn't your real father." But it's such a shock to the system. You know, the person who you thought is your biological father isn't. I've heard that story many times with homies. where that became the precipitating event for a kid to get into a gang because of that shock.
Yeah, for me, I was kind of happy because I had looked up to her like as an older sister.
Yeah.
And I mean, honestly, as I look back and even growing up, being young, I knew that the circumstances were, pretty dire in our house. Like there was a lot of violence at a young age because this was passed down stuff. This was generational. And so a lot of that stuff I was already experiencing was like the domestic violence, alcoholism, our house being the spot. Our house was the spot. It was just like it was a party house. And people from the neighborhood, that was the house that they kicked it at. So I don't think it was the me finding out that she was my mom. I think it was the events that came to pass after I wanted to just be with her. Like I just wanted her so bad. That became my truth. Is like, okay, she's my mom. I want to be up under her. I want her to raise me. I want her to spend time with me. I want to go to the park with her. I want her to push me on the swing. And I'm not saying she never did any of those things, but one of my first memories of my mom, and I can't pinpoint if this happened. I must have been younger. It must have been when I thought she was my sister still because I was young. I was really young, and we were on our back porch, and there was homies walking by our house. They had just moved to the neighborhood or something because years later they ended up hanging out with us. But they were walking by our fence, and she whispers to me. She says, "Run to the fence and ask them dudes where they're from." And I was a little boy, and I ran to the fence, and I said, "Hey, where you fools from?" And I was just a little kid, and they tell me, and she's on the porch, and she yells from the porch. She screams out our neighborhood, and she tells them, "This is my water." And I looked at her as a strong, woman, but these were the things that I was learning as a child already growing up. Um, and then she comes down there. They eventually meet. They had moved into our neighborhood, but they were from a different neighborhood, and but that's how she was raised. It was passed down like these teachings, these practices were passed down. We were taught to, like, if somebody messes with you, you fight them. Don't come back home without, like, don't come back home saying that someone's messing with you if you didn't fight them. That's what we were taught. Like, they had a saying is, if you get your ass whooped in the street, you're gonna get two ass whoopings, one out there and then one when you come home. And these are the teachings and the practices,
Sure.
and so she was passed down those, and then she was in turn passing them down to us. And you know and then just like at that point, I remember there was a point though too, like being young, and I talk about my cousin because he was wise beyond his years, and for whatever reason he had an understanding that we were doomed. You know what I mean? Like there was this like he had dread in the sense that where we were headed, he didn't want us to go. And I remember we would always try to, like, we started to try to remove ourselves from that environment in any way we could, like go to the backyard, play with our toys, get on our bikes and try to get away from it. And one day, we go to my grandma's backyard, and he tells me, he's like, "Promise me no matter what happens, we're not going to get jumped into the hood. No matter what happens, we're not going to get in." And he was like pleading with me in a sense, but it wasn't hard for me to say, "I promise you," because I didn't want it. I really didn't want it. I remember shaking his hand, and I said, "I promise you, I will not get in." He's like, "Me and you, we're not gonna get into the hood." And I shook his hand, and then he ended up getting jumped into the hood, and I followed right behind him, and then he was murdered. He was 14 years old when he was murdered, and it was like I was living a life that I hated in a sense, but I felt like it was the only thing that I was worthy of, if that makes any sense. It was like a life that I kind of despised because I seen what it was doing to my family. I remember being a kid and looking at like my uncles and my mom and just what it was doing, to my family. But at the same time, I become this, and I like Stevie, he has mentioned this in the past too. Like everything I hated, I became. Everything I despised, I became, and that became my reality. And I remember feeling that in prison. I remember looking out across the yard, going, "I didn't want to be this. You know, this is not where I wanted my life to end up. And here I am. And then it was even up until the moment when I started to think about change. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was so broken, you know, and this goes back to the part I talk about stuffing and saying, I don't need love. I don't want love. I forbid love, to losing my mom. And then eventually all this pain, it started to surface and there was no way to stuff it down anymore. And I like that because it reminds me of what you say. It takes what it takes, right? You know, a loss of a loved one, you know, an extensive length of time in prison, you know, maybe a child being born. Mine was the death of my mother. And I always say that my mom did more for me in death than she could have done for me in life. Um, she she actually, her death inspired me to live. As crazy as that sounds,
Yeah, no, it makes sense though.
you know. And it surfaced, and I was like thinking, oh man, I want my mom. You know what I mean? I wish I could have had my mom. And I remember being upset in a sense with myself, but not just with myself, with everything, with the circumstances. And looked in the mirror, like, who are you, homie? Like, who are you and how did you get here? And I started to reflect when I was in the hole. Like, how did I get like here, you know, like in this little cell, in the hole, in the prison, but even in the hole, like, how did all these events lead up to this? And I didn't have all those answers back then, but I started to kind of reflect on my life. And I thought about the sitcoms I would watch. And I thought about the promise I made in my grandma's backyard. I thought about how much I had despised this life and then became a part of this life. And I thought to myself, like, if there's another way, I want to find it. I don't want to die like this, you know? And then I made my way here and things really started to make sense for me here. I started to awaken to things that I was feeling and experiences, because of experiences that I had and emotions that I was feeling that I didn't even have a term for them. I couldn't even identify them. I was I was hurt and broken, and I was afraid, you know. I was even afraid to be out here in society at this time because I had been locked up for so long. And it was just peeling all that stuff back and creating a process. Um, and look, here we are.
Yeah, amazing. And the journey's not over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did you start to see Pops, like, because I know you worked with gang members for many years, but when did you start to see the piece about healing? Like, how did you know that? Like, how did you look at? Because you know how some people will look at something and they'll see it a certain way, and for many years, society looked at the gang problem and seen it as, you know, what, however they saw it as. And how did you see it back then? And how did that
Well,
shift and alter?
it specifically in terms of Homeboy, I remember the homie who was kind of a rock star and a leader, and he didn't get a job. He got a career through us. He worked at Homeboy, and then he just took off. So it was like nothing stops a bullet like a job. And then I always tell the story where, you know, a monkey wrench got thrown into his life. His lady left him. So he just that night he went to his neighborhood, and well, one thing led to another, and he's doing 125 years to life. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy was the rock star. He was the poster child for Homeboy Industries. You know, success, career. But the thing that didn't happen was he had no resilience. So when the monkey wrench got thrown, he unraveled, and that was because he hadn't done the work. So you know, you want the homies to be able. You don't want them to be toppled by whatever comes their way. You know, talking to a homie today who, you know, experienced a lot of deaths, personal deaths, and so he just started to get high and drink, and then he unraveled. And that just says, you know, you haven't done the work. You know, you're the point of doing the work is not just to know yourself, which is of course a gift, but it's also to be able to have the world throw at you whatever the hell it's going to throw at you. and you won't be toppled, and you'll be resilient, and you know who you are in the face of it. And it doesn't matter what it is, death, disappointment, your lady leaves you. Doesn't mean those things don't hurt in a profound way. They do. And you have to grieve them. But once you're kind of a sturdy house, no wind is going to tear you down.
Yeah.
And that really happened like at midpoint in our 33 years, where I went, oh, here's our missing link. And almost like overnight, we stopped saying nothing stops a bullet like a job.
Yeah.
Because it was about healing, really.
And was it a hard transition? I mean, because even to this day, some people don't really get it, right? Like
Yeah,
on both.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was difficult. I mean, because then we started to throw things in like therapy
Yeah.
and groups and the 18-month program, which is parallel to the 18 months that it takes to attach to your caregiver. So we had all that stuff in mind, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, I look back on it and I just think it's kind of old, you know, the idea of nothing stops a bullet like a job. I was interviewed on a podcast 2 days ago or whatever it was, and they, you know, and they mentioned that. They go, well, of course, you know, you have famously said nothing stops a bullet like a job. And I go, ouch. You know, inside I'm going, no, that's kind of not who we are anymore. And I'm
Yeah.
glad it isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, a job is good, but healing is forever.
That's right.
I mean, it kind of is forever if you really surrender to it and if you're dedicated to it.
It transcends us. Like, I mean, because even stuff that shows up today, like it doesn't even have to be from my past. But like you said, things that life throws at us. You know, we know that, yeah, we're gonna go through some things, but at the end of the day, like it's not gonna topple us. It's not gonna stop us from moving forward. And that's the part of healing that I love the most. It's resilience. And we all have it as human beings. And I think when we touch it, like you know, when we get our hands on it, we don't want to let it go, because it suits us out here, whatever we go through.
But you have to nurture it. You have
Yeah.
to practice it.
Yep.
You know, it's not a resilience really isn't once and for all, you know, and you have to it's like a storehouse of resilience where you can go, yeah, this is going to be hard, but I can take it.
Yep. Have you ever had a moment in your life where shit got real hard and you felt it, but I mean, you still pressed on? Like, what moment can you think of in your life that was hard that you had to press through?
Oh, when I had to lay off 300 workers, there's
Yeah.
that. And then prior to that was when I had the two guys from the graffiti crew who were gunned down 3 months apart or whatever it was. That was hard. Those were two moments.
And just looking back at those moments, what were some of your practices that helped you get to the other side of that, Pops?
Well, you have to have a light grasp on stuff, you know, and that comes from prayer and trying to be as anchored as you can be, where, you know, take anything away. Take homeboy away tomorrow. Yeah, okay, I'll feel it, but it's not going to topple me. Or death, I learned that a long time ago. Or, you know, the kind of whatever happened as a result of the 300 laying off, you know. On the one hand, there was a rallying, so people came to help, but not that much. They kind of saw it as a failure. Never mind that we had the recession of 2008, which bit us in the ass. But, you know, that's okay. Even reputation, you just kind of go, yeah, I'm not going to cling to anything. because
Sure.
that's where suffering comes in, and not even life itself. It's like I don't know. A homie wrote me. My mom is sick, or was it the grandmother? I don't know what I'm going to do if she dies, and I'm saying, yeah, we're all going to die, and there are no exceptions to that. So probably a good idea to brace yourself, because it's going to happen.
Nobody makes it out of this alive.
Yeah. So, but it was quite the, I won't be able to continue if my grandmother dies. I go, well, yeah, I mean, I get it. I get the grief, but yeah, then don't waste any time, because you got a lot of preparation to do, because she's going to die. I'm telling you right now, newsflash. And so, but it was a kind of a funny thing, and kind of an obvious thing, but
It's
that you spend your whole life kind of bracing yourself for
Yep.
stuff.
There was this thing I heard, and it was interesting. It was Mike Tyson, and he talked about life and death, and he talked about how we celebrate birth, but there wouldn't be life if there wasn't death, and there wouldn't be death if there wasn't life and birth. And he says we got to honor the both of them, and it made sense. I resonated with that.
Yeah.
Um, we've gotten to, as a society, a practice of like that extreme mourning. And I'm just not saying, because I mourn for my loved ones that have passed on, but there's also a practice of like remembering the great times with them and honoring the memories you have that you spent with them. And for me, like one of my practices is like I live and move differently in this world because of the people that I've lost. I want them to be proud of me, and I share stories of my mom with my children. Stories of things that she taught me, and some of the stuff that she would tell me, and her laughter or her jokes, and those are the things I want to carry on, and those have become my practice. But I do like how you say about the like light grass, and not really. You told me a long time ago, and I forgot exactly how you said it. And the thing we were talking about the samurai, when we were talking about like, why were something about the samurai being so efficient, because they were already like the Walking Dead.
Yeah, samurai is the already dead one.
The already dead one.
Yeah.
Where they don't have.
You can't touch me.
Yeah. And I like that.
When I took Joseph Olguin and his son Joey to the Black Hills, and there was some big thing at that monument at Crazy Horse.
Yep.
And so we gave a talk, and the widow of the sculptor, the guy who carved his face, it's not even finished. I mean, it's just the most impressive thing you've ever seen. It's like Mount Rushmore times 10, And so I remember she gave me a big quilt that was beautiful, and I gave it to Joseph and Joey for safekeeping. But I think they were the ones who told me that, Black Elk, they took away his lands, and they were kind of mocking him. And they said, "Where are your lands now?" And he pointed at the Black Hills. He says, "My land is where my ancestors are buried." And it was his way of saying, you can't touch me.
That's right.
Because they're, and he could point to it and say, it's right there. That's and right. Like, it's never going to go anywhere. It's not going to move to LA.
That's right.
It's right there, and my lands are where my ancestors are buried.
That's right.
And it's a powerful thing. So I always say, find your Black Hills, find your thing, that no one can touch.
That's right.
I'm going to have to go, because we have a gathering here.
Okay.
Love talking with you as always. I'll see you in 2 weeks on this venue.
All right. But thank you guys for tuning in.
I'll see you in the course of the week.
I love you, Pops.
Love you, Jose.
All right. Good night.
Good night, son.